Hey there, it's Ricky Shockley, owner of MedSpa Magic Marketing and host of the MedSpa Success Strategies podcast, where MedSpa and aesthetics practice owners come to discover strategies and tactics that help them better market and manage their practices so they can grow, improve profits, and have more financial freedom. Perfectly in line with our mission statement today, I'm excited to be joined by Ben Hernandez. Ben is the founder and managing director of Skytale Group, a firm specializing in strategic management consulting and mergers and acquisition advisory in the healthcare space. Ben and the Skytale team help businesses grow, scale, and sell. So today we're going to talk about how to get your practice to a point where it's sellable so you can cash out if that's your end goal, what that entails, how the process works. So I'm excited to have this conversation with Ben. Make sure you stick around to the end. All right, Ben, thank you so much for joining us today. We're super excited to have you. I've had a few people on the podcast that have grown med spas and sold them. So I'm really interested to dig into this part of the conversation from a business standpoint today. I guess first, could you just tell people a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Of course, and thanks, Ricky, for having us. My name is Ben Hernandez. I'm founder and managing director of Skytale Group. And, very brief version on Skytale is we do two things. We do management consulting, where we help businesses, typically founder-owned, grow and scale, typically through a financial and operational lenses. And we also do investment banking, which basically what that means is we sell businesses to typically institutional capital. So think private equity or family offices that are putting together platforms within the aesthetic space.
Okay, awesome. That's great. We're super excited to have you on. So I guess first, for business owners, med spa owners, practice owners that really don't know what goes into growing a business to the point that it's sellable, kind of wanted to get into that a little bit because I think a lot of people in this space, they have a skill. They go in, they open a little small room somewhere. Next thing you know it, they're managing a $2 million med spa with a bunch of employees, and they might have not even thought about the idea of selling their spa and cashing out. So I just wanted to, I guess, an overview of what that looks like generally.
Yeah, I think, businesses who call us that are very attractive, you're absolutely right, Ricky. We get a lot of, for example, depending on state, whether it's an NP who owns it or a physician, those type of people, they didn't go to business school. So inherently, they didn't really go to school to found a business, but that's accidentally, as you put it, what they've done. And a lot of them have done it very, very well. And I think the ones who have a lot of success have been at some point in time, maybe not immediately, but they've been intentional about forming a plan, meaning, we like to say starting with the end in mind. As you go along, how do you take control of your business? The best way to do it is to really know exactly what you want your business to be and where you want it to go. We like to say you probably have a painting in your mind. Go ahead and paint it, not just for you, but for your team members so they know where you're going and we're all sailing in the same direction. And then you can get into things, we like to think of them as pillars, such as systems, people. How am I going to grow to be sure that you put enough capital away if you're one of the, founder-owned businesses that we see that actually add multiple locations to what they're doing. So scale yourself, basically. And if you're going to do that, what we see is some very successful operations behind that. So things like SOPs, things like team members knowing exactly what their role is and what success in that role is. Most of us spend most of the day in these organizations. We want to know what success means to whether it's their boss or the founder. So we see some combination of that to the businesses that are, very successful.
Yeah, makes sense. SOPs is one of our internal buzzwords lately. We've been really harping on those, trying to build those out. Okay, so I guess, so knowing that kind of overview, that overarching perspective of what it means to sell a business, when people, let's say you're someone who's managing a $2 million med spa practice right now, how do people have an idea? What is a general ballpark for how to evaluate a business and what they might be able to sell for and when it might be the right time to sell?
Yeah, so I think you would take a few steps. One, if we're going to go with the example of a $2 million top line revenue med spa, roughly speaking, I'm assuming that's going to have $500,000 of profitability, 25%, let's say. The way that you would go about valuing it, and it's a little bit more nuanced than this, is we would take their financials, their P&L, and we would adjust for things to really get to true operating efficiency. So a couple of three examples here that are pretty big and happen almost every time. One is you as a founder owner, you can pay yourself any which way. You can pay yourself, well, within IRS guidelines. You can pay yourself, let's say, $100,000 a year and then take a lot of it from distribution, so off the balance sheet. Or for that same business, you could theoretically pay yourself $500,000 a year. So what we do, step one, is we strip all of that out. And we would then say, what would we pay Ricky, if you will, for that position if we were hiring another Ricky, or if Ricky, God forbid, were hit by a bus? So that is a way that buyers are going to look at it, is depending on your function, what you're doing, they're going to put that within your P&L. A second example is rent. If you own your building and land, you can charge yourself rent however you want. We would get to market rent. That's an important one. And the third one is anything personal or one-time expenses. So personal things are things like personal vehicles, gym memberships. We see some people for tax strategies paying their kids out of it. We would adjust for that to really get to, if I'm a buyer, what is truly part of the business. So when you make all of those adjustments, you get to that adjusted profitability. And then when you get to the adjusted profitability, you can also call it EBITDA. You've probably heard that word a lot. And basically that's, cash flow, if you will, to simplify. Then we know what a general multiple is, depending on a few things, such as, how many providers and what type of services. But for 500,000, you might see something like a 5.5, maybe 6 times multiple. And that changes as profitability goes higher, the multiple also goes higher. So we know once we get to that EBITDA number, that cash flow number, what a pretty good multiple is going to be in this space for what we're seeing from buyers.
Cool, interesting. So just rough ballpark, that's kind of a 5x as a standard, and obviously can be less, can be more. But you get that profit number, making all the adjustments that you just outlined, and then you're looking at a 5x multiple after that.
For the 2 million one, you're correct.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So does that multiple change with bigger or smaller practices?
Yeah. Great question. And, I think for a well-performing, so I'm making a few assumptions here, well-performing medical aesthetic practice with a nice service mix that's still growing. So there's some meat left on the bone. Generally speaking, for $1 million type of EBITDA, we're probably seeing a 6.5 to 7.5 times multiple. You get into 2 million of EBITDA, you're looking at 8.25, maybe 8.5 type multiple. And then you get to 3, you get into 9.5, bumping into the 10. So you can kind of see as you start, building your business, the multiple goes up. And the theory behind it is that buyers don't like risk. So if you're able to build a business that's producing $3 million of cash flow every year, inherently there should be less risk. You have figured something out. You have a secret sauce. You probably have provider diversification and a few other things that a business that's cash flowing 500,000 a year maybe doesn't have. So, there are a few components there to that valuation methodology, but yeah, it's pretty interesting how high it goes up.
That is really interesting. Yeah. So like it's kind of like an exponential return because you're growing on both sides of the equation in a sense. Like you're more successful as a business. It means not only is your valuation going to be higher, but you're also getting a higher multiple.
Yes, 100%. And it's interesting. The market's starting to open up and realize that. And we're getting a lot of calls from, entrepreneurial owners who now realize, wait a minute, you're telling me if I grow my profitability or open location 2, 3, that I'm more valuable. So it's really been interesting what that does to the market when they realize that.
Yeah. And so owners like that have potential sale in mind, even if you're just exploring this for the first time, profit is the name of the game, though. It really has nothing to do with the revenue generated by the business at all, right? Like you could be a business that does $2 million a year and you're losing $100,000 every month, every few months. You're worth nothing essentially, right?
That's a great point, Ricky. You're right. Yeah, because if you're producing 2 million a year and I'm buying you and you're losing 100,000 a year, I'm not really buying anything other than losses, right? I mean, if I buy you now, I'm the one paying out 100,000 a year. So yes, you're correct. Ultimately, it comes down to profitability.
And then your out is basically Your valuation is just, I forget what you obviously know the term, when you're just selling like your equipment and your space. Let's say you own your space and all the equipment. That's your backup plan if you're not a profitable business and you're looking for an exit.
Yes, and not as an attractive one, right? But yes, you're absolutely right.
That's like a dump it. I've got to get out of this. Yeah.
That's right. Hopefully, none of us are going to be in that situation.
Yeah, exactly. So with profit kind of being the name of the game, and that's the thing you have to look for. I mean, obviously, as business owners, whether you're selling or not, profit is the name of the game. That's how you're going to have a better lifestyle, be able to pay yourself more money, take home more from the business, have more comfort and convenience. But for owners, you mentioned that adjustment is they have to be taking their personal salary. Like they have to assume the sale of the business needs to operate as if they were replaceable. So could you talk a little bit about how that works generally and kind of connect the dots on that a little bit?
Of course, yes. So if you're a business owner, and plastic surgeons are easy in the aesthetic space, so let me pick that. But you can insert whether you're an injector, whether you're simply a CEO and aren't looking at, touching patients at all, whatever it is your role is. But let's go with plastic surgery because that's easy. If you're a plastic surgeon, what you would do, let's say you're producing 1 million a year, a buyer is going to pay a plastic surgeon, including you as the owner, post close, 40% of production. Roughly speaking, that's what just about every buyer group's going to do. So, regardless of how you're paying yourself, what you would want to do, or what we would do, is we would disregard the way you pay yourself today. And we would say, okay, Dr. Ricky produces 1 million a year, so $400,000 is going to go to his salary on the P&L, regardless of how you pay yourself. So that's how we would do it. Because yes, you're right. If something happens to you, or if you leave tomorrow and we have to replace you, we're going to have to replace you with a physician who's going to charge us market, which in this case is 40%. If you're an injector, it's closer to 25%. You turn that into a dollar, not percentage, but roughly speaking, that's what it'll do to the production on the P&L. So that part's very important. Another important point, so I'm glad you brought this up, is if you sell your business, Ricky, you're not going to get to go to Bora Bora tomorrow. It's not like selling a house, because you're typically, as a founder owner, such an integral part of the business. We're going to ask you to stick around as a buyer. If I were a buyer, I would be asking you to stick around. So typically what we see is about a 4-year employment agreement, and some sort of rollover equity, meaning if I pay you $10 million, I may say 7.5 million is cash to you, 2.5 million is rollover equity, which means that you're buying shares into my organization. And the reason I bring that up is they tie the employment agreement, so the 4 years that we were asking you to work with us, to that equity. And basically, that's how they get the teeth into the employment agreement, because they're paying really nice value for that. And a lot of that value is future assumptions that you're going to continue in the business. So that part's extremely important for planning. It's not like you can wake up one day and say, I'm ready to retire, if you're a producer, especially.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I was actually going to be my next question, because I was listening to one of your other podcast episodes where you were interviewed, and I know you talked about that exact same topic. So that's really good insight. So when you're selling the business, basically expect to do it with that employment agreement attached to it. And it sounds like the idea of having some portion of that sale being in equity also gives the owner to have an incentive to still do a great job and keep the business running as they were previously.
Exactly. From a buyer perspective and from a seller perspective, it's all about alignment, right? And motivation. Sellers aren't going to be overly motivated if the only way they get paid is based on how much they produce. So you're exactly right. That equity portion of it should motivate both parties to continue to grow the business. And then the thesis behind it, and this gets, a little bit into the weeds, but the thesis behind it is, if I'm private equity, I want to turn my investor's dollar into $3 within 4 or 5 years, let's say. So ideally, if you sell to the right group, and then you can get into, make sure you do diligence on the buyer and that they've shown historical success. Because in the example we're giving, right, you're rolling 2.5 million into me. So depending on when you come in at that life cycle of that platform and that business, you might expect it to turn into $7.5 million, right? If things go pretty well, which is oftentimes the same amount that our sellers get for the first 75% of the sale. So that part gets
Wow. Yeah.
interesting. And you touched on something else important on the 4-year agreement. I think it's important if you have the luxury of time to set yourself up in a position of when I sell, whatever it is I'm doing today, just understand that that's what the buyer is going to want me to do tomorrow. So start positioning yourself in a role that you're really going to enjoy and want to do at the point of sale.
That makes a ton of sense. That segues into what my next question was going to be. Is there an option to sell? Like, let's say you're an owner of a med spa and you really have gotten it to the point where it is hands off. Like, maybe you're just managing some very top level stuff, but like the financials, the books, the day to day management, the operations, all of that is taken care of for you. Is there an option to sell and to dip out, or is that really not how these sales generally work?
It's easier to negotiate down the employment agreement. So I love the subject you brought up. Really, in any business that you're building, we like to say that a beautiful business, like pie in the sky, is a business that can outlive you as a founder owner, that no longer needs you as a founder owner. That's an extremely valuable business. So, from a valuation perspective, number one, you're going to get really nice value. From a selling perspective, contract, employment agreement, yes, you can get closer to leaving day one if you do it that way. And I should add, if you don't value the equity portion of it, right? Because equity,
Yeah.
typically they want you to be there in order to, take part in that accretion. But let's say that is what you wanted and that's a business you've built. It is a lot easier to shave that down into maybe, so we've seen this. We've had some who have actually built these businesses, and you might see something like a 1-year employment agreement or 6 months with some sort of option to maybe be on call to be a consultant. And really, what that is what they're trying to do is they'll say, okay, Ricky, you built an amazing business and it operates without you. But when you sell, presumably the staff is going to respect you and like you and they know it's your business, so there's this nice transition, maybe 6 months a year, to where you can at least show up and chief culture officer of sorts, if you will.
Be the figurehead, at least, kind of, at the very least.
Exactly, and just calm the staff so they don't leave. That's exactly right.
But you're saying, so hypothetically, the more disconnected you can be from the business and it's still operating and profitable, that could actually make your valuation on the front end go up in terms of the multiple?
100%. So, yeah, I mean, taking two extremes, let's say that, and we see this, let's say you own a business and you're, 80% of the production, 90% of the production. That makes buyers nervous because there's a lot of key person risk in that, right? Meaning if something happens to you or if you're for some reason not motivated anymore, I'm banking on you for 80, 90% of the value of this business. Let's go to another extreme. Let's say that you were a provider 5 years ago and you no longer treat anyone and you're now, CEO, loosely speaking, but aren't really doing much. That's extremely valuable because you've been able to train and build the team around you to where you probably have multiple providers. So if we lose a provider, not the end of the world. We now have shown that we know how to replace providers. We've shown that we know how to build an operational team, that the front desk can greet patients the right way, that we have, good patient retention and so forth. So yes, in that extreme, I would pay a lot more money for the one where your team is humming versus the one that, we fail or succeed based on what you're doing.
Interesting. Very interesting. So basically, if you're an owner that's got any vision of selling, you kind of need to figure out, hey, how can I make sure this thing is as profitable as possible and that it's less reliant on me for the day-to-day operations. Those are like the two things, it sounds like, that you really want to work on from a valuation standpoint. When you're an owner and you're trying to make that decision, like, hey, is it time to cash out now? Should I keep going for a couple years? How do you tell people when is the right time to pull the trigger when they might want to make an exit or look at a sale?
Yeah, when we get phone calls asking us, hey, I might sell, I might not, I'm not sure, but I at least want to talk. The way that we help is, and you can do this as well, right? But the way that we would do it is we would put together what's called a pitch book. and someone basically gives us their financial data. We sift through it. We go through some of the things that we talked about earlier, Ricky, to get to adjusted cash flow or EBITDA. And we'll get on the phone and say, okay, based on what we're seeing, the business is valued at $10 million if we were to take this to market. And then we walk them through a deal structure of, middle of the fairway. And by the way, you as a seller have a right to negotiate some of this, but middle of the fairway, 7.5 million cash at close, 2.5 million rollover equity, staying on 4 years, non-compete, non-solicit. We try to bring it to life. And then from there, you at least are going to have something to take home to say, okay, 10 million is actually higher than I thought, and I actually want to be done in 6 years. So, okay, I'm ready. Or you may go home and say, you know what, my number is actually 18 million and I still have a lot more time, so I think I can get there. So that's the way that I would start, is really understand what a buyer would pay for you in market. And then you can make a decision from there.
Makes a ton of sense. Earlier in the conversation, you mentioned something about growth. Does that factor into the valuation? So let's say you're a business that's been in business for 5 years and you're doing $1 million, but you've grown like 25% year over year after year to get to 2 million or $1 million in revenue, versus a business that's just kind of been living at that same threshold for years and years and years, but you're still profitable. Like, does that matter, or is the profit number the only thing that matters?
That does matter. If I have a business that's cash flowing $1 million a year and there's no more room to grow, I'm going to pay a good multiple for that, because you have a steady business at least, right? So
Yeah.
you won't be punished for that. You'll get a healthy number. However, if you have a business that's cash flowing $1 million, and we see this all the time, we actually have a few right now that are going through this. Let's say you're cash flowing $1 million and you tell me, by the way, I just opened up location 3 and here are the projections to that location. That'll be a more valuable business, because the way that investors look at it behind closed doors is not just what you've done trailing 12 months. They'll project out, and we do as well, project out 3 years. So on one business, you're going to see it'll be $1 million, still profitability in 3 years, still a nice business. But on the other one, maybe you'll say, hey, look, the first 2 have done X. This one's going to bring it to 1.7 million of EBITDA within 3 years. That allows buyers to stretch a little bit more on the multiple potentially, but especially on what's called an earnout. An earnout is basically a bonus to where a buyer might say to you, okay, on that 3rd location, if you really can grow it from 0 to 700,000 top line rev year 1, 1.5 million top line rev year 2, there's additional value to you for doing that. So you brought it up earlier on the equity, that alignment piece. They also do that within deal structures this way.
Very nice. Got it. In terms of a sweet spot when people are selling, do you see a lot of single location practices selling, or is it mostly after if people have built up a second, 3rd location that they're pulling the trigger on a sale?
It's very mixed. I'd say right now, it's about 50-50. We see
Okay.
a lot of single locations that have nice profitability, and we also have a lot that are in that 3 range that have figured something out that also have really good profitability.
So in terms of selling a business, who is buying the business? So people that are really unfamiliar with this world, who is it that's buying the business generally?
Yeah, so first we'll start with what's called a financial buyer or a strategic buyer. In our space, probably 80% of the buyers right now are financial buyers. A financial buyer is basically institutional capital, which is basically a way of saying private equity funds or family offices. Those are typically the buyers. And what they do when they first start is they'll start a platform, and that platform could go to 50 practices, 200 practices within that platform. It's going to be multi-state. It's going to grow quickly. We have a few examples in our space, such as AMP is probably one of the best known. You have MedSpa Partners, you have Alpha, you have a few there that are starting to get that, and some of them have grown to nice scale. Then you have what's going to be called the strategics, and strategics are going to be what I think most of us will see in a couple to a few years. Strategics are the platforms themselves, where when I sell, I'm going to sell to, I mentioned AMP first, so let's take AMP. Well, if I sell my practice, I'm going to sell it to AMP, if you will, and be what's called a tuck-in That's a strategic, which is a platform that's backed by private equity, but already built out. But yeah, right now, most of our buyers are still those private equity groups or family offices themselves that are trying to start that platform. We're pretty early on.
Yeah. And if somebody's wanting to sell, they don't obviously have a connection with those buyers really to start shopping their business. So that's when they contact someone like you, correct?
Correct. Yes. And a lot of our sellers call us and say, hey, a buyer reached out to me. Is this a good valuation? And, from our perspective and why we got into this is we badly want business owners to get full value for their business. So just like selling a house, right? If I knocked on your door and I was like, hey, Ricky, I like your house. Can I buy it? And you had no idea what its value was. You probably wouldn't do that. You'd probably, stage it, clean it up, make it look like you want, put a for sale sign up and let people walk through it to really start competing to get to true market value. It's the same concept here of, we typically show it to 40 to 60 buyers. And even beyond valuation, you have to think of some of the things we talked about deal structure. You're rolling over a lot of that value with a buyer. You want to be sure that they're a good buyer, that they've had historical success and returns, that their partners like working with them, right? That they know how to do multi-site healthcare. And so you want to make sure that you like the people that you're going to be working with for 4+ years.
That makes sense. So how does it generally work when someone contacts you? How do you all, just from an overview standpoint, how do you all make money? Is it a commission on what you're like? You're basically going to maximize their valuation, get them as much money as possible for their business, put them in the best position for a nice cash out, and you all have like a flat fee, a commission. I'm just more curious, how does that work?
Yeah, so the way that we work is, for that pitch book I mentioned earlier, to just have a conversation and it's educational in nature. There's no charge there. That's just so is this the right value for your business? Is this interesting to you? If from there you liked us and you signed on with us, the way that we charge is a flat percentage fee and nothing else. We don't charge a retainer or anything. So basically, what that means is if we close, we get paid. If we don't close, we lose a lot of money.
Yeah.
Our interests are perfectly aligned.
Cool. I'm going to make sure we put that specific link in the description of the video too, if people want to reach out to you for that conversation.
Thank
And
you.
then my last question here was, so as a business owner, you're kind of doing the math and you're thinking, well, if I just stay in my business for the next 20 years and I've got it working to the point where I don't really have to be involved in the day to day and I get to take home this nice salary, is the incentive to sell kind of like the same as when you have like a settlement or win the lotto? It's taking the lump sum, getting the cash now, and all the financial advantages that come from getting that big pile of cash now, as opposed to sitting it out for 20 years to see that come to fruition. Is that kind of the idea?
That's a great question. Yeah, we get it all the time. And I'm going to say it depends, because if you're someone who's done in 4 years, that's a different answer than to your example if you said, I want to ride this out 20 years. Um, that being said, here's what we do. We would run Ricky in a parallel universe, right? We would run Ricky in, okay, you tell me, how long do you want to go? And what's your end? I'm going to shutter the doors. Okay, so this is how much you're going to take home every year. And, depending on how you want to invest it or not. And let's say you sell today, here's the value of your business. So here's your cash, 6 months from now, if you will. Here's your equity portion, and we'll put a 2.5 times return on that to be conservative. So that's a totality of the deal. If there are earnouts, we'll take that into account. And with that money you get 6 months from now, how much are you going to invest? And we'll put a rate on that. So then we'll be able to show you, okay, here's option one, here's option two from a monetary perspective. And then that delta, depending on which way it's going, is your execution risk, right? Like making sure that your business is going to be healthy in 20 years, that nothing happens to you, so on and so forth. So that's the execution risk. And then, our sellers take that into account and they choose one way or the other. But yeah, we're asked that a lot. So we had to come up with this
Yeah,
parallel universe
it isn't.
example.
Yeah. That's a really cool idea. I had to actually show them the
Yeah.
math. That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, this conversation's getting me excited. If I was a practice owner, I'd be thinking about how do I get to the point where some of these numbers you've thrown out, this is exciting. If you're a business owner, then I know a lot of times you get kind of complacent with just, hey, my business is doing okay, I take home some money, and you don't necessarily have that vision of the future. But I think this is something as a business owner to get really excited about, having the potential to sell your business, see a big cash payout, As a lot of spa owners, med spa owners, they're not taking home necessarily a ton of money. So work on getting your business profitable, because if you can get to the point where you're selling a business, it's life-changing money potentially, and puts you in a position where you have more freedom than you could have ever imagined. So, Ben, if people want more information about you, where they can find you, what you're up to, where can they go?
Yeah, so my personal email is ben.hernandez at skytalegroup.com, Skytale Group. And our website is skytalegroup.com as well. So you can reach us any of those ways, and we're always here to help.
Awesome. Any last words of wisdom, or do you think we covered it?
I think we covered a lot. I mean, you're very gifted in the way you ask questions. So thank you, Ricky. You led us down some great roads. But that last piece you mentioned, I'd love to reiterate. I think it's really exciting for business owners in this space. They're kind of the frontier people, if you will. This is very early on in consolidation. So it's always, I agree, a very nice surprise when they see how valuable the asset is that they've built and spent, blood, sweat, and tears into. So I agree. It's always fun being able to show them those values.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thanks so much, Ben. It was great having you. We'll probably want to do another episode at some point. I'm sure we could have some more stuff to talk about. So we appreciate having you on, and hopefully see you on the next one.
Yes, looking forward to next time, Ricky. Thank you so much. Had a great time.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. This podcast is a production of Med Spa Magic Marketing. If your med spa or aesthetic practice is in need of digital marketing services, help with advertising on Facebook, Instagram, Google, lead generation, and booking more appointments, please visit medspamagicmarketing.com.